This week's podcast comes as a special request from a student of mine who wished to know the best ways to keep yourself free and clear of any negative energetic influences. This is definitely a consideration for us as yoga teachers and spiritual leaders since we are surrounded by people all the time and we don't know what kind of emotional state they're in. We want to keep our own selves elevated, and sometimes if they're in a negative state, their influence can rub off on us. So, this podcast will feature some tips and techniques for you to keep yourself free and clear and how to do spiritual protection. Welcome to the Modern Mystics Podcast. I'm your host, Alanna, the yoga doctor. I'm here to help you realize your potential as a spiritual leader and elevate your work in the realm of yoga, mysticism, and spirituality. This podcast covers all of our favorite topics: yoga, alchemy, astrology, divination, spirituality, psychology, ritual, and mystical practices, both ancient and modern. Get ready to up-level your status as a modern mystic. So, while this podcast will definitely get more into the woo-woo end of mystical practices, I wanted to start off with the most powerful and practical way to keep yourself clear of negative energy. Now, this is actually something to consider for you not only as a teacher, as a guide for groups of people, but just in your everyday life. You know, a couple years ago, I remember that there was a big buzz around something called an emotional vampire. I don't know if people are still talking about this, but I remember seeing lots of articles in my news feed about this. And essentially, what it indicates is that there are people who are in such a negative emotional state that they can actually drain you of energy. Now, whether you believe in the psychic elements of this or not, that is actually a real thing, and we've all experienced it. It brings us down to be around other down or negative people. And of course, the recommendation is to try as much as you can to be around people who maintain a high elevated vibration or a high emotional state, just as you are doing. But let's be honest, this is the real world. That's not possible all the time. And as much as we might do our best, we can't control everyone else's emotional state. And we're going to be in situations where we can't control who else is around us. In fact, there's not much of life we can control anyway. But if we're employed in an office or a bigger corporation or something like that, we have no idea who the other people are that we'll be working with, and we have to work with them. And then as a yoga teacher and spiritual leader, we are often going to be in front of groups of people, and we don't know everything about what those groups of people have been through in their daily lives. It's likely that most of them are in a pretty high vibe state, especially if they're doing spiritual practices with you. But we also know that people pursue spiritual practice because they are in need of elevation. So this means that we need to do our best to maintain our own state of elevated energy or our own high vibration. And there are multiple ways to do this. I want to speak about the most important way to do this first. And this is actually to employ our spiritual practice and do our shadow work. You see, we want to create a scenario where we're like Teflon and things just slide off of us. So Teflon, I know that there are some environmental concerns and health concerns with Teflon these days, but we know what Teflon is and does, and when it's on a surface, it makes it a very slippery surface. We want the surface of our energetic being to be the same kind of non-stick. We don't want things to stick to us because when things stick to us, when negative energy sticks to us, it's ultimately going to have a negative effect. Now, the easiest example for me to illustrate this is when someone has perhaps said something negative to you, said something that was harmful or hurtful, and, I'm sure your parents told you the same thing that mine told me, which is that, just let it slide like water off a duck's back, right? Sticks and stones can break my bones, but words will never hurt me. I remember learning that, I think in like second grade, because I definitely went through bullying, and perhaps you did too. Perhaps you're still going through it. When people say negative, harmful things to us, we're often told, oh, just let it slide off your back. But that's not always as easy as these quippy phrases make it seem. Sometimes these things do harm us. They're the things that noodle into our mind or worm their ways into our mind. And we actually repeat these negative phrases over and over. And that ultimately is something that we take on and creates damage in our psyche. So this is an easy way to illustrate how someone else's negativity will have a direct effect on us. It will have a direct effect on our confidence, our self-esteem. So what I want you to imagine here is that your energetic body, your psychic body, and I literally mean your psyche, okay? The actual spiritual and soulful contents of your psyche, not necessarily the ethereal psychic land or world, which I'm all about, and don't even worry, I'm not discounting it. I just want to create a really clear picture for you right now. So if you imagine that your psyche or your psychic body is not just inside of your physical body, but does extend outside of it a little bit. If it has holes in it, right? If it's not completely smooth, if it's got any kind of holes or breaks or cracks in it, that's going to be where negativity gets through and damages you. And whether that be diminishing your self-esteem, making you feel bad, triggering you, causing an emotional reaction that is disproportionate to the event itself, those holes are what we have to patch up. And that is why we need to do our own spiritual practice and our shadow work. Spiritual practice and shadow work are the most effective ways of patching up your soul, your spirit, your psychic body, so that it is completely whole and like Teflon, right? If you imagine you covered yourself in, some kind of material, like let's say something fun, like a big cashmere bubble, or, you had this layer of protection around you, it's going to be more effective when that protective layer is whole and complete. The cracks, the dents, the holes in it are going to create and cause some havoc for you. And, in one of my last podcasts, I did talk about the importance of an elevated state of mind. This is so important. Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras actually harps on us a little bit. He tells us a few times how important an elevated state of mind is. It's called chitta prasadanam, meaning literally the sweetness of your chitta, your mind stuff. When our mind is elevated, when we maintain a high vibration, that is the easiest place for us to do our spiritual work, for us to empower ourselves fully, for us to pursue our passion and our calling. So we really want to think of maintaining a high vibration as our spiritual practice. It is our duty. It is our responsibility as spiritual leaders, and it's so important. So creating and cultivating a daily spiritual practice is going to help you with this. And now I don't mean doing necessarily 60 to 90 minutes of asana a day. Asana or posture practice is really a very small piece and perhaps not as an effective piece of practice as we may have given it credit here in the West. The most effective pieces of our practice are the more spiritual elements like chanting, like meditation, like ritual. In fact, those are the parts of yoga practice that are actually 5,000 years old. Asana has a very recent history, and I'll be doing another podcast on that here in the coming weeks. So you want a daily practice that fits into your life, that makes sense for you, and that just allows you to maintain this deep connection to the purest and truest part of yourself. And that's going to help to fortify your psychic body. Now, those types of practices can be really simple things. This is not a long, drawn-out event. What I want to make sure you get away from is this idea that a daily spiritual practice has to happen in a large chunk of time. Very few of us actually have a large chunk of time every day to commit to a spiritual practice, which means that it's going to be much easier for us to fall off that particular wagon, and there goes our psychic body. So I'm talking about simple practices like waking up and writing down 3 things that you're grateful for, first thing in the morning. Before doing anything else, 3 things that you're grateful for, and it helps to set the mood for the rest of the day. Perhaps doing a simple, super simple 5-minute ritual, and I'll be walking you through how to do rituals in a future podcast too. or just maintaining a sense of kindness or gratitude throughout your day, right? It doesn't have to have a focused block of time. It's a technique or practice that you can employ even as you move out into the everyday world. So creating a personal spiritual practice that actually works for you and keeps you connected is something that I write about extensively in my book, Yoga Beyond the Mat. So if you want more ideas about how to do this, that is a great resource for you and a good place to look. The other thing that will help you tremendously in keeping your psychic body whole and complete so that there are no cracks, dents, or holes is shadow work. Now, this tends to be a bit of a buzz term that I hear going around in our spiritual circles. So let me define this for you. Shadow work literally means working on your shadow. Your shadow is your unconscious mind, right? And I've explained a little bit about how psychology works in terms of yoga and spirituality, that our psyche literally has basically three pieces. The supra-consciousness, which I would call the spirit, the unconscious, which I would call the soul, and your conscious mind or your ego. So your ego is how you operate in everyday life, but it is really beholden to these other parts of your consciousness. The ego doesn't necessarily operate on its own. It's often served up emotions or thoughts from the unconscious. And when we don't examine that, it's not just out of control, as it can get a little wild and wacky, but it is out of our control. We have no control over our unconscious, when actually to do shadow work, to take a look at that shadow, means to develop a relationship with it. And it doesn't mean that we'll ever control it. I don't want us to get into the mindset that, yogis are supposed to be control freaks in any way. There are things that we do enact control over, but that's a very masculine, hardened way of trying to drive a stake through our spiritual practice. We want to be a little more soft and a little more receptive with our spiritual practice and with our unconscious mind. The unconscious mind is the repository of the true magic that lies within you. And in order to access that magic, in order to access your true gifts, in order to access life's greatest lessons that it has to offer you, you're going to have to take a look at some of the parts of your shadow that you don't want to look at. Now, oftentimes we talk about shadow work and spiritual practice, but we don't actually do it. When this happens, it's called spiritual bypassing. And this really is a true psychological term. And it's a psychological term that was coined fairly recently in response to people who are doing spiritual practice but not actually doing the shadow work. So essentially, spiritual practice becomes a way to enable or affirm or perpetuate your own BS, belief systems. And that's actually antithetical to what spiritual practice is meant to do. We're here to uncover what is beneath this shadow, and mythologically speaking, that is gold. We're looking for our inner gold, but it can't be found unless we're willing to dig deeply and face our fears, face our triggers, our deep emotions, take a look at why things scare us and what it is that we're actually scared of. Shadow work is therapy. For lack of another term, you do need to employ some kind of therapy, or one of my favorite styles of therapy is hypnotherapy, the use of hypnosis. There are other forms of therapy out there, but this is generally a really positive way of taking an honest look at these darker parts of yourself that otherwise go ignored. And when they are ignored, they are the things that dominate your life. There's this wonderful quote by Carl Jung, the founder of depth psychology, that says, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate." So let me explain that a little bit. Until we do our shadow work, the things that are delivered up from our unconscious to our conscious will make life feel like it's coming at us, and we truly have no control over it. That's what fate is. Fate is just going through life believing that it's coming at you and there's nothing you can do and these things are happening to you. Destiny is when you seize what is happening and embrace it and accept it with your whole heart. These are very, very different attitudes. So when the unconscious serves up, let's say, anger or frustration, a trigger, over something that is very small. Let's say someone calls you a name or has one of these harmful things to say to you. It's going to happen to us all. When it has a disproportionate emotional reaction, when it's something that you can't let go of or that you think about over and over or that ruins your day, that's a trigger. That's coming from an unconscious place where somewhere in your lifetime before, someone has said something similar and it ruined your day before too. And because it was unexamined back then, it is still unexamined and it is still ruining your day and ruling your life. So the importance of shadow work cannot be underestimated. And here's the thing about it. We may say, oh, I'm in a spiritual practice. I don't need to go to therapy, or yoga practice is shadow work enough. It's really not. And especially for those of us that want to pursue a leadership role, we actually have to take a much more aggressive and active pathway into doing our shadow work. And we do need someone else to guide us. And we need that guide to be well qualified, which is why looking into various forms of therapy is a great option, because those people are trained and skilled at helping you do your shadow work and digging up these triggers, these old belief systems, these old thought patterns that are tripping you up and getting your way and allowing holes to be present in your psychic body. So I want to say this very, very clearly. You, as a spiritual leader, can only take people as far as you yourself have gone. So if you have not done your shadow work, you cannot really help others through their challenges with shadow. If you have not resolved some of your core belief systems, you will likely not recognize the core belief systems of others. If you have not mined the shadow for some of your gold, it will be difficult for you to find that gold in others. We as spiritual leaders can only take people as far as we've gone ourselves, and so it is really, truly on us. It is our responsibility to do this shadow work and keep our unconscious as free and clear as possible, to process through traumatic events, both current and historical, in order to have this very clear sense in our psyche that we can withstand whatever life might throw at us. Now, life is going to throw all sorts of shit at us. And no matter how much shadow work or spiritual practice we do, there are definitely going to be times where life throws us something that certainly puts a dent in our psychic body. But at that time, we need to have the tools and resources in order to go back to either spiritual practice or the person we use to help with shadow work to patch that up. We can't simply blame external factors for this dent and not take responsibility for it. It's our psychic body. We have to patch it up. We have to keep it clean and clear. And this allows us to maintain a high presence, a high vibration, a really solid bit of Teflon around our psychic body. So hopefully that all makes sense, and hopefully that all resonates with you, and that you understand that for you to be able to go out into the world, whether it's as a teacher or just in general into the world, when you do encounter negativity, when you are fortified in this way, it truly will be like water rolling off of a duck's back. This we can describe in Sanskrit as santosha. So santosha is one of our niyamas in the eight-limbed path of yoga as put forth by Patanjali. And it is this sense of contentment. Right? Contentment is not an emotion. Right? Emotions are fleeting. They come and go very quickly. In its own natural state, any given emotion is actually only going to last between 60 and 90 seconds. The reason why any emotion perpetuates any longer than that is that we replay an event over and over in our minds, and our minds do not know the difference between a real and an imagined experience, and so essentially we continue to re-traumatize ourselves, which is why an emotion lasts any longer. This again is shadow work that is needing to be done, and it's a trigger that has come up, and it's a reason for you to explore something deeper. Okay, so when we're in a state of santosha or contentment, Emotions can come, they can rise and fall, but they will only last that very natural duration of 60 to 90 seconds and then they will pass. So santosha doesn't mean that you're happy all the time. Santosha means that you're content. And the way that I like to describe it is that you are moored to a deeper, stronger, more spiritual source that is a part of you. Now, I like to sail. And when you are moored in the water in a boat, it essentially means that your anchor is it's stuck. It's really secure. It's not shifting around, it's not moving. It's stuck to the bottom of the body of water. And your boat can move. Your boat actually still moves with the tides. It goes up and down, but it stays in the same location. Sometimes it faces north, sometimes it faces south, depending on the direction of the tides or the winds, but it stays in that same spot. And in fact, you can actually sleep on that boat. You can completely surrender and rest, knowing that you're not going to be carried off by the tide, that you are completely moored. So that to me is santosha, this idea that no matter what life throws at you, no matter what happens around you, your emotional state can rise and fall. It can face north, it can face south, it can, the tides can shift, the emotional tides can shift, but you are still moored. And that is, again, another way to achieve this state of spiritual protection so that you can maintain clarity even in the face of negativity. So again, for a greater list of specific techniques to help you, I definitely recommend checking out my book, Yoga Beyond the Mat. In it, you'll find a technique called Free Your Mind. And this is a technique that helps you to question thoughts that come up. Not any thought. I mean, you could question any thought, but specifically thoughts that create trauma, thoughts that would propel you down a negative spiral. These thoughts happen, right? All humans will have, I don't care how enlightened you are, these are going to come up. They are just part of your makeup as a human being. And when you have a thought that is disturbing, that is challenging for you, that is creating a hostile emotional environment within, that is the sign that there is something more deep going on within you. It's not a sign of external circumstances. In fact, it's never a sign of external circumstances. When a thought creates a strong negative emotion, it's pointing you to a trigger within the unconscious. And for you to understand that this is truly self-created it's really empowering. It means that there is a scenario in which you could endure the same kind of thing and actually not have a big emotional reaction. It might, piss you off and you walk away, but you're not going to spend your day brooding on it or thinking about it for the next 2 or 3 days or worrying about it for the next week. You'll have a natural reaction, and then you'll move on, and it won't continue to bother you. So when there's a thought that does bother you, it's pointing to something more deep within you and that gold that lies beneath the shadow. And so we want to question this thought, and the first way that we question it is by recognizing the thought is actually not true. It couldn't possibly be. Because let's say you shared this negative thought that you have, this negative belief that you have with your best friend. They would likely disagree. Or perhaps if you shared it with 5 different people, they would all have a different take. Now, in order for anything to be true, it has to be true 100% of the time. So because this thought isn't true for everybody, then we know that there's some miscalculation in this thought. And then the process of freeing your mind is to actually feel what you feel when you think this thought, which is likely going to be some version of bad. And noticing that. And noticing that probably you don't want to feel that anymore. That, gosh, wouldn't it be great if you could just get rid of this thought forever and you would be more free. And then you give yourself permission to feel what it's like not to have this thought. What happens when this thought is free from your mind and it's gone? What do you feel then? And it will likely be some version of good. And this is your opportunity now to disempower that thought, because this thought has a hold on you and it's creating a negative cycle. This is the basic structure of karma, these negative thought loops. And we want it to break free and we want it to spiral up rather than down. So the way that we do that, the final step in freeing your mind, is actually thinking the opposite. And this is something that Patanjali tells us to do. Vitarka badane pratipaksha bhavanam, he says. I believe it's Yoga Sutra 244. And it's literally, when disturbed by disturbing thoughts, think the opposite. So find a few versions of the opposite of this particular disturbing thought and actually feel into those other versions being true. In what ways could they be true? And you've suddenly disempowered this thought that has had a hold of you and that is poking holes in your psychic body. So again, that's more clearly outlined in Yoga Beyond the Map, but there's a little simple overview for you. I wanted to give you a clear practice to help you fortify yourself and find that sense of santosha, in addition to you committing to your daily spiritual practice as well as doing shadow work. Now, let's get into the more fun, frou-frou, and woo-woo side of spiritual protection, because those things, they do also help. Now, again, I don't necessarily need there to be a belief that these things work, or I don't even need to know how they work. But when we put faith in them to work, they do. Right? We don't have to know the mechanism behind it. I don't necessarily know the mechanism behind it, but I know that I've had a lot of success with these particular things. So my favorite element of psychic protection is actually crystals. I do love crystals. Everybody loves pretty sparkly things, and specifically clear quartz. Now, when I used to run yoga teacher trainings in a studio, I run all my training programs online these days, but when I used to run them in a studio as a graduation gift for my students, I would give them a clear quartz. Because when you walk into a room, again, of students, you don't know where everybody's coming from or what their days have been like. So, you might have someone in there who's essentially blaming you for their day. That is the nature of working with groups. And if they're pouring some negativity onto you, you want to deflect that. And a clear quartz crystal helps. It will absorb negative energy. Now, I've had some really wild experiences with this. I have a big clear quartz that I wear around my neck, and I call it my insurance policy. And I used to wear it when teaching big groups. And again, you never really know what these big groups are going through, or, what individual is blaming you for holding half moon pose for 5 breaths, and that's just not what they want to do. So this clear quartz, it starts out clear, but as it absorbs negative energy for you, you're actually going to start to see dark spots or little gray smoky bits in it. I once had a big red streak through mine. And what's really wild is not only how it accumulates this dirtiness inside the crystal, but that the more you do your shadow and spiritual work, you will actually be able to once again purify it and make it clear again. I've seen this happen. And I've also seen such negative energy occur within a group of people that it actually broke a crystal. So pretty wild stuff. Again, I don't know that I have the ability to explain the exact mechanism, but again, I don't know that I need to know the mechanism to have it work or to place some faith in it. Another thing that I do like to do is every time I go into a group of people, I imagine myself simply surrounded in a bubble of white light. And this bubble of white light helps to deflect any negative light or negative energy. It's very simple, and you just, before you walk in, you fully cloak yourself in this white light. And then you allow it to be there and have faith that it will stay throughout the duration of your teaching. And then once I was done teaching a workshop or a class or whatever it was, my tradition was always to go to a faucet with sink with running water and place my hands underneath the running water and take 3 deep breaths. So on the first inhale, I would imagine my emotional body becoming cleared, and then as I would exhale, I would imagine all of the dirt or gunk from it being poured through my hands and being washed away from the water down to the drain. The second inhale would be to clear my physical body, and exhale to wash that negativity down the drain. And then the third inhale would be to clear my spiritual body, and then the exhale would be to wash it down the drain. So that's another simple thing to do. And then you can also clear your energy using things like white sage or Palo Santo or Florida water. These are additional tools that help to cleanse negative energy. You use them in your home as well, and you can use them on yourself. So those are my favorite tools for keeping clear and employing some spiritual protection as we, as light workers and spiritual leaders, work with people who, we have no idea what battles they're fighting. We have no idea what's going on with them. And we want to be as elevated in order to do our best work and as connected, moored to our spiritual selves through Santosha as possible in order to raise their vibration as best we can. So hopefully this has been really helpful for you and given you some things to practice as well as think about. Thank you so much for listening. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on wherever you found this podcast, as it helps others to find it too. And if you want to join the conversation with other spiritual leaders like yourself, then I invite you to join me for a 2-week trial for only $1 of my highereducation.yoga membership. And you can find that at highereducation.yoga/trial. In any case, I look forward to talking with you on the next podcast. And until then, namaste.